Hello everyone, Nadim here with PC.Solutions.Net. So today we're going to talk about how to restore an OS drive in a VM in Azure. It can happen where your OS drive does not boot for whatever reason and you need to do some recovery on it and restore from scratch. You've probably watched the previous video. If you haven't, go ahead and watch that, and let's get started. So first, I'm going to create a test VM here, and I'm going to create a file in it so we can identify and differentiate VMs before and after the restore, so we can prove that the restore has been done. So in this situation, I've just created a file. We will take a backup of this VM, and then we will rename the file, and then we'll do a restore, kind of like what happens after a disaster. And then after the restore, we will clean up everything, clean up behind ourselves. And that's very important because that way billing stops, right? So here we have it. Let's go ahead and shut the VM down. And we are going to go into the Azure portal. Once in Azure portal, we will set up the backup. And of course, Azure makes this really easy with the resource groups and things like that. So it's not going to be a big problem. So here we have it. We're going to enable backup on that VM. And Azure will pretty much walk you through it. The only thing you have to be careful about is to create things in the proper resource group. That way you can delete the resource group and everything inside it will get removed as well. Right now I'm just setting up some initial things. So for example, we want to minimize how much days worth of backups we're keeping. So just choose the minimum option there. We want to enter the backup resource group, and before I hit OK, here I'm going to put in the resource group name for the backup, and that's what's happening here. So let's go ahead and put that in there and hit OK. And I think that's it. Let's go ahead and enable backup. Now what we're going to do is we're not going to wait for Azure to do the first backup. Once the deployment is done, we are going to start a backup immediately. So that way we don't have to wait for the next time window to hit for the initial backup, which can take some time. So here we go. The deployment is in progress, and I'll fast forward where appropriate. So you'll see some things kind of jumping forward. That's just to get around some of these screens where deployment is happening, and it takes some time to get some of these things done. There's a lot of stuff that's happening in the back end. So there's a vault being created, there's the policy being created, all this stuff is happening. So to us, it's just a few clicks, but there's actually a lot going on in the back end. So here we're going to pause for a little bit. So now we have the backup going. So let's go into our properties and make sure for production systems, I would recommend that you select locally redundant or geo-redundant before you start the first backup, because once you start the backup you cannot change that, so it's done. We're just going to make some disable the soft delete settings, because we don't need that. It's just for testing purposes anyway. So now we go into backup items, and there we have it. There is one VM in there, and you'll see initial backup is pending. So we are going to click on view details, and we will start the backup. So we're going to say backup now. Just choose the minimum there just because it's for testing purpose only. You'll notice how the backup is in progress, and once it's done, we go back into our resource group, and everything now is in that resource group. And let's connect to the VM, and we're going to make a change. So now we're going to log in, and we're going to change the name of that file we created on the desktop, just so we can identify once the backup has been restored that a restore actually took place. And since this VM only has one drive, so that is going to be the OS drive. There is no other drive on this VM. As a good practice, if you have data that needs to be stored, you want to attach additional drives as data drives so that you can separate your OS drive from data drive. So just change the name, shut down the VM, do a restore, and then we'll go back in there and confirm the restore took place. Now, one thing that you might want to pay attention to is sometimes I've seen that the process does not automatically swap the OS drive in the VM, so you might have to manually do that, and that's why it's a good idea to make a note of the disk for the OS. Just make a note of that, what that disk name is, so we can identify it and replace it if it has not been replaced. So now we go into our backup items, click on the VM, and we're going to restore it from within the VM pane as opposed to from the backup pane itself. So let's go in there, restore VM. And this is the point where once we choose the backup, when we select replace existing and we choose the staging location, we have to first create the staging location, which is just a storage account that we have to set up. You have a separate staging account. That's where restore is done, and then basically Azure just swaps the restored with the production disk drive. So we'll go in here, we'll create a storage account. So the resource group, I'm going to leave it the same that we have. That way when we delete it, everything inside gets deleted. And of course, the storage account name, it has to be all lowercase. So let's fix that. Standard is fine, and we're just going to choose LRS. We don't need this. Just conserve costs, is just for demo testing purpose. So there we go. Of course, getting rid of all the soft deletes. Soft delete is basically Azure will retain deleted stuff for a certain amount of days. We don't want that. And create. Okay, and it has been created. So we go home. Let's go back into our resource group, and let's go back to the VM and do a restore. Back into restore, select the restore point, and we're going to replace existing, and we're going to choose the staging account that we just created, and hit restore. Now in this case we chose replace existing, so it's automatically going to swap the OS disk after it's been restored to the staging area. Sometimes it does not do that, so that's why you need to make sure and keep track of the disk drives. That way, if the swap doesn't happen on its own, you can manually swap the OS disk. And now we're just going to go in and let's take a look at backup jobs, see what's happening there. So if we go into jobs, you'll notice that there is job in progress. Now the way it does this is first it backs up the OS drive that we're going to restore, and then it does the restore in the staging area. So that's why you see the two jobs over there. That's built-in safety in Azure Backup. It will back up before it does the restore. So let it do its restore, and there we go. So the restore is done, and let's go into our VM and look at the drive. So if we hit refresh, and there you go, now we have an additional disk that's been created. That's the new disk that was restored. So now if we go into disks, notice how that's the newly restored disk name. Sometimes that does not happen and you have to click on swap OS disk up at the top to swap it out with the restored disk, and that's the only thing you have to pay attention to. And now we'll start the VM up and make sure that it's the restore disk that is attached, and we'll know it because the name of that file we created in there will be different. So let's start it up. And we don't have to do anything fancy here. We don't have to boot into safe mode, redo any of the disks or anything. It's all automagic. And just hit refresh. Let's make sure it is started and running, and then we'll log in. And notice how our IP address and everything is the same. So let's log in. Moment of truth. And there it is. As you will notice, the file on the desktop that we created, it will be the restored file, not the file that we renamed it to. That just shows that the OS disk was restored, and that just also tells us the importance of keeping your data drives separate from your OS drives. Keep everything modular. So I'm going to go ahead and shut it down. Now the most important part is we need to clean up what we did. Don't forget to clean up, because if you leave something behind, it's going to cost you on a monthly basis. So let's go in here and just clean up some things. Now, of course, since we have a backup, we may not be able to clean up just by removing the resource group, but we will try that. It's probably not going to get rid of the resource group by itself, because there are certain dependencies inside in one of those components where it might have, like it has some retention going on, so it's not gonna get rid of that. But we will try it. We're going to delete and let it delete what it can, and then if it cannot delete something, we'll go back and manually delete those components. And the Azure portal was just a little delayed. You noticed how it says starting the VM. That was from a few minutes ago. We already connected to it, tested it, and made sure everything was good, and only now we're getting that message. But let's go ahead and delete. And while it's doing that, we probably want to go back into the staging resource group and clean that up as well, because that was not the resource group but the staging area. So we want to clean the staging area as well. So let's go in there, go into all resources, and just making sure that everything is clean. So notice the resource group names on the right there. We're only concerned with the OS drive DR. So let's go ahead and hit refresh, see what all it was able to delete and what it wasn't. Thanks for watching, everybody. It was a long video, but at the end, it was some good content. A lot of people have requested things like this. So remember to subscribe, hit the bell button so you get notified. And we release a couple of videos a week. So and let me know what kind of videos you would like to watch. More technical, more business. We can do either way. Have a great day, everybody.